The doctor, I don't know if the doctor was involved, but he had something going on.
Okay, we were, we concluded Peter's prayer last time that we were together. It's kind of interesting. We had 2 weeks in a row that we could actually be together in classes. For us in 2025, that's kind of a record. And so at the conclusion of this prayer, I pointed out that there were two kind of implications. Number one is that we as disciples of Christ, we as members of the Lord's church really need to understand the value of the Lord's church and to kind of put aside the idea that, well, because we are small and because we don't have the money, because we don't have the power, that the Lord's church for somehow is weak or ineffectual. We are the crowning jewel in God's creation. Everything was pointing to, as we are going to read in this section this morning, everything was pointing to the coming of Christ. And when Christ came and fulfilled his mission, and then the Lord established the church, it doesn't get any better. Now, it will get better when we have our the final revelation of Jesus, as once again we will read about here momentarily. But on this earth, in our physical lifetime, it's not going to get any better. We are God's crowning jewel. Okay, so let's see, how do I want to do this? It's kind of one long reading. If somebody could read, we'll just read the whole paragraph. 1 Peter 1, and we want to read verses 13 to 21.
Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Keep sober in spirit. Set your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lusts which were yours in ignorance, but like the Holy One who called you. Sorry. Just I hit an electronic problem here.
Uh-oh.
Sorry, I'm good. But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior, because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy. If you address the Father, the one who impartially judges, according to each one's work, conduct yourselves in fear during the time of your stay on earth, knowing that you were not redeemed with perishable things like silver or gold from your futile way of life inherited from your forefathers, but with precious blood, as of a lamb unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ, for he was foreknown before the foundation of the world, but has appeared in these last times for the sake of you who were through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God.
Okay. Quite honestly, way too much to talk about in one, 30, 35, 40, even 45-minute lesson. So we're probably going to have to just hit the high points. Hopefully we can get through with this, but there is just so much in this paragraph. As I was sitting in my office this week, I just kind of almost had to chuckle to myself that I was having far too much fun. Even right up until 9:15, 9:20, I was, wait a minute, what about this? And chasing this rabbit. Wait a minute, I need to verify that. And just too much. Okay, always remember the context. It becomes very redundant sometimes to always say it, but always place passages of Scripture in their context. And the first word that Peter uses in this particular paragraph, which I believe is a good break. I think there's a fairly clear break between verses 12 and 13. So he's kind of concluded his prayer there in verse 12, and so he begins verse 13 with the word therefore. So why is therefore? What's he going to get ready to transition into, and why is he building it on? Dennis.
So, part that you call the prayer is the foundation. We have a foundation. One of the things I talked to a number of people about, the books of the New Testament are basically, I go back to my education background. You want to teach a concept to somebody, you talk about what it looks like and sounds like. These books tell us what the gospel sounds like and looks like. So he says, here's this gospel. You believe in it? It was given to us. Therefore,
Yeah.
Here's how you put it into action.
Okay, that's what I was hoping for. Anyone else have a thought or comment on the shift? Therefore is such a profound shift. Every time we come up on the word therefore, it's like, okay, he's established something, he's about to establish something else, and so that word therefore. Anyone else have an addition to what Dennis just said? Okay, if I could put this in language of kind of a common theological argument, the prayer establishes God's grace. Particularly notice verse 10, concerning this salvation. All right? So he has established that the disciples to whom he is writing have a very precious gift. It is their salvation. That is the kind of the thrust of this prayer. They're having problems. They're being slandered. They're being maligned. They're facing trials. They're facing tests. And so, just like the Christians to whom the Hebrew author is writing, things are tough. Brad's series of lessons on 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, the congregations in Thessalonica were up against it. They were having problems, and so Paul had to write to kind of buck them up a little bit, kind of give them a little bit of encouragement. And this prayer just fits that paradigm, that outline perfectly. So, if the prayer establishes the grace of God, then the therefore is a transition to, all right, now what are you going to do with it? How are you going to handle this grace? What are you going to, what is expected of you? The little phrase that I mention quite frequently is that grace always precedes covenant, and yet covenant always follows grace. If you go back to Genesis 1, God gave Adam and Eve the garden. But then he said, this is how I want you to live in the garden. God gave Noah the ark. And after he brought Noah out of the ark, he said, okay, I protected you, I saved you, I delivered you. This is how I want you to live. God brought the people of Egypt, Israel, out of Egypt, brought them to Mount Sinai and said, okay, I have given you grace. I have delivered you. I have saved you. This is how I want you to live. So every major event in which God demonstrates his grace, he doesn't say you have to do this in order to earn my grace. He says, I have given you this. Now this is how I want you to live. Flash forward to the cross. We didn't do anything to deserve the life of Christ, the death of Christ, the blood of Christ. God gave us the blood of Christ. Now, he says, this is how I want you to live. So grace always precedes covenant. Covenant always follows grace. And so Peter says, okay, I have established what you have, this great salvation. Therefore, and I love this. I'm sorry, I just have too much fun. Preparing your minds for action. And I noticed the New American Standard had a little bit different. Does anybody have the King James or the New King James? Gird your loin, or gird the loins of your mind. And folks, it doesn't get any more beautiful than that. Perhaps in my outline here, one of the greatest phrases of all time. This is actually what God told Job. And we go back and look at these two passages, Job 38:3 and verse 7. God looks at Job and says, okay, you've challenged me to a fight. Gird up the loins of your mind and get ready. What is the phrase, gird up your loins? What's going on here with the phrase, gird up your loins?
You touch the screen so you can get some more done.
Yeah. Gentlemen, we don't wear tunics anymore. We don't understand this. And so we would depend upon our wives to explain this to us. Wives and girlfriends and mothers and sisters and all. It's difficult to run in a tunic that extends below your knees. Now, I assume, and since I'm not Scottish, I don't have any way of verifying this, that if you're wearing a kilt, you could probably run pretty quick. Unless you're wearing those funny little shoes that the Scottish men always wear with their kilts. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I hope anybody watching on YouTube doesn't get offended with that. But a tunic that extends below your knees is going to get you tangled up. And so you need freedom of your legs, whether you're going to run or fight, either way. So you gather your tunic, which is going to be a very loose, kind of free-flowing garment, and you tuck it into your belt. Most men would be wearing some sort of belt around their waist to carry a pouch of tools or whatever it is. And so you would take then that tunic and gird your loins. And so Peter uses that expression, which whether he's remembering Job, what God told Job, which would be a wonderful event if that was it. Jesus actually uses the phrase, Luke chapter 12 and verse 35, talking about preparing yourself, preparing the disciples there. This idea of girding yourself, getting ready. But what I love about this is Peter says, gird the loins of your mind, is literally how you would translate that. And so our English translations then, getting back to Dennis's comment that all translation is commentary, have to explain, what in the world is Peter talking about here? So the ESV, prepare your minds for action. Well, that is so milquetoast. That is so bland.
And I like the idea of girding up, because what that does is gets rid of the unnecessary encumbrances
Yeah.
that you have coming with you.
You get them out of your way.
Yeah, get the baggage out of the way so that you can focus on what's real.
Okay, we're not even halfway through the outline. We're well into our class. So Peter then, and the commands here that I have pulled out are actually the verbs in Greek that are in the imperative. So there, particularly in the ESV, there are phrases that sound like they're commands, and honestly, I think they probably are, because what these words are in the Greek, they're participles, but participles are always governed by the primary verb that's associated with those sentences. So if the primary verb is in the imperative, then the participle that's connected to it also picks up that flavor. So the three verbs that are specifically imperatives, in other words, commands, are set your hope fully. Set your hope. That's the command. Okay? Set your hope fully and completely on the grace that will be brought to you when? It's an important phrase that we want to be aware of. When is the final grace going to be brought to us?
At the revelation of Jesus Christ.
And here again, the word revelation, that's the word of the final book of our Bible, the apocalypse of Jesus, the revelation of Jesus. Okay, so the second one, be made holy, which is found in verse 15. As he who called you is holy, so you also be holy. That's our second imperative, second command. And then the third one is found in verse 17. Conduct yourselves. And I was absolutely hoping that the word fear was not the typical word for fear, because I think the English word fear, particularly with younger people, that kind of gets the connotation that we should be terrified of God. And in a tiny little sense, that's true. I can't remember which translation it was that I looked up, but the word reverence is used. Conduct yourselves with reverence. And I really prefer, even though the word fear there is the Greek word for fear, just like our English words have a wide variety of different meanings, I prefer the word reverence. Conduct yourselves with reverence. Not being terrified of God, but being reverent to God the Father. Any observations, thoughts, questions, comments about those? Because I want to get down to the additional phrases. Any thoughts on those commands, though? All right. Something comes up, be sure and raise your hand and let me know. Now, so the other phrases that Peter attaches to these imperatives let us know how we are to do this. How are we to set our hope fully? on the grace? How are we to be made holy? How are we to conduct ourselves with fear and reverence? Well, the first one, according to the ESV, is being sober-minded. Brad, I don't think that phrase was in the New American Standard, verse 13. Being sober-minded, set your hope fully on the grace. Verse 13.
Keep sober in spirit.
Sober in spirit, okay. Any other translation there as opposed to sober-minded or Matthew, you have the NIV?
It just says, be self-controlled, set your hope fully on the grace.
Okay, self-controlled. Self-controlled. I like that. That's a good explanatory type translation. So we're not supposed to go flying off the handle. Another expression the old timers would use is don't go off half-cocked. If you're familiar with firearms, you kind of understand what going off half-cocked means. If you're handling a revolver or the old 1911s, I know some of them have a half-cocked position. What happens if your gun goes off half-cocked?
He isn't going to discharge the
Yeah.
cartridge.
It may not have enough oomph on it to ignite the primer, so you just kind of get this click. You were expecting a bang and you got a click. So being sober-minded, being self-controlled, don't go off half-cocked. He's writing once again to people who are really struggling. They're being tested. They're being maligned. They're being all these things, and they're questioning. And so, when we are in a position of fear and anxiety, a lot of times we react without thinking. And Peter's saying, make sure you get your mind in gear, gird up the loins of your mind, be ready. Don't be careless. Don't be foolish. Don't be making decisions without thinking them through carefully. Then he says, as obedient children. As obedient children. That's a very easy to understand phrase there. And then he uses a couple of other. In today's, how shall we say, woke culture, you're not supposed to criticize you're not supposed to criticize your enemies, right? But you're certainly not supposed to criticize the people on your side. And I noticed, no matter how many times I have read that this week, hearing Brad read it, it just kind of caught my attention even more. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the passions of your former ignorance. When I was a professor, it really would not have been all that, well, I was never a professor. When I was an instructor, it would not have really been to my benefit to look at my students and say, you know, back when you were stupid, because he's saying you're not stupid anymore. He's saying your former ignorance, but still you're not really supposed to point out to your students that at one time they were pretty ignorant. Yet Peter does that. The passions of your former ignorance. But he actually goes on further to say, in verse 18, knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers. So he's pointing back to their past and saying they were ignorant and they were following ways that were futile, which is once again a way of telling them that they're now new people. They have been redeemed. They are, and we're going to get to this. If you've been reading ahead, you know that in chapter 2, Peter talks about them being a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession. So he keeps coming back to building them up and letting them know what they are now and who they are now. But I just thought that was funny that he pointed out their former ignorance and their former futile ways. Any thoughts or comments about that? Because we've got way too much left. Go ahead. Don't anybody.
It's actually a type of teaching device. And that is, you make a statement and you say, but of course you already know that. So
Yeah.
having known that, then you can move on. And students half the time are going, I didn't know that. And it's forcing them after that. They have essentially stumbled across their own ignorance. And in a kind way. Of course, you already know that.
Yeah.
So let's use that to,
Yeah.
it's a powerful teaching device.
Dennis?
You know, another example of the commentary nature of the translations, if you look at the ESV versus the King James and New American Standard, in verse 17,
Okay.
it says that, let's see, talking about God who impartially judges according to each one's, is it deeds or works?
ESV says deed.
Deeds. The others say works. And there's a little bit of a difference in terms of modern dogma.
Oh, okay.
So I would imagine there were interesting discussions around the table when I looked at the Greek. The Greek word is works.
Right. Yeah, so that would be to be a fly on the wall and hear that.
I can see where either one fits. Works is probably more inclusive in terms. Deeds talks about what you do. Works is all encompassing about what you did and didn't do.
And the reasons behind it, the motivations behind it.
So
getting back to this comment about the ignorance, here again, our culture, you're not supposed to point out anybody's mistakes, even your own. It takes maturity. We're going to talk about that here in just a moment, but it takes maturity to look back on your life when you made mistakes and to say, I made a mistake. We want to excuse ourselves. Well, it may not have been perfect, but think about my motivations. Don't look at what I did, look at what I wanted to do. But to say, what I did was wrong. What I did was stupid. What I did was a sin. That takes maturity. And Peter here is really trying to lift his people up to a level of maturity where they can look back and to say, my past is in the past. What did Pumbaa say to Timon? Don't put your behind in your past. Timon said, put your past behind you. Pumbaa got it all messed up and said, don't put your behind in your past or whatever. So Peter is trying to elevate his readers to recognize that what they are living in now is the truth. Back then, in their past, it was ignorance and it was futile. Okay, maybe we want to hit this again right before as we get into our class next week, but why can we do this? How can we do this? Why can we do this? Well, Peter lays it out in like a machine gun. Boom, 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 boom. Knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways of your forefathers, not with perishable things. And then he lists two things that at least on the top of my head are not all that perishable. Silver doesn't just perish, does it? Gold, if it's refined properly, doesn't just perish. So that is kind of a head scratcher. But he says, with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without spot or blemish. Now, certainly to the Jews, that would have tremendous meaning. To a Gentile, maybe, maybe not. And oh no, we're going to have to absolutely have to come back to this. Jesus was foreknown from the foundation of the world. And boy, do we have something to talk about that. Made manifest in these last times for the sake of you. And I love the way the ESV emphasizes that. Jesus was made manifest for you. And we go back to the prayer. What's the prayer all about? This incredible salvation that we have been given. And so don't be looking down on yourself. Don't be digging your toe in the ground. Look at what you have been given. Look at how you have been blessed. Through him, that is through Jesus, we are believers in God. Therefore, and the ESV says, so that our faith and hope are in God. So it kind of begins with a therefore, and it ends with the therefore. Even though in verse 21, the ESV says, so that your faith and hope are in God. Does any translation read therefore? Therefore your faith and hope are in God. I wonder. Yeah, not the same word. Sometimes Peter doesn't listen to me. That happens quite frequently. I'll figure out what I want the text to say, and then when I really get into the text doesn't say that. And I'm like, Peter, if you would just listen to me, Paul, if you would just listen to me, your scripture would mean so much more and be so much easier to preach. As one of my professors said, there's nothing like getting in the text to ruin a good sermon. Any thoughts, comments, questions about this particular section? And we will come back next Sunday morning and look at this last little paragraph here. But any other thoughts or questions or comments? Okay, keep reading. Put all this stuff together. We will review this just a little bit next week, but we also want to get into Peter's transition beginning in verse 22 down through about the first paragraph of chapter 2. Another one of these unfortunate chapter breaks. But all right, let's take a break as we get ready for our worship service this morning.